Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be hailing from. This is Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents, and I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy. And joining me for a very community-focused episode is Mr. Nate Lager. Welcome
Yep,
back.
I am not Brian Smith. Hi, everybody.
Hey, I spent extra time with our graphic this week because I had you listed, but I had Brian's face. So you were welcome. I fixed that. You are no longer Nate stuck in Brian's body. So
That
you're welcome.
would have been really confusing.
Yes, it would. Okay, so there was a brief video delay, but it seems to be fixed now. So if you're in the chat, give us a shout. Let us know that we look and sound correct, just in case. My confidence monitor over here in the corner says we're good. So that said, I mentioned that today is a very special episode, a community-focused episode. Our guest today is a hero of mine, a good friend, and me sitting here in this chair at this job is all his fault. So if I suck at my job, blame Noah. But in case you haven't met Noah, he's known as Colonel Linux out in Matrix and just about everywhere else. He is a radio host, an entrepreneur, an open source advocate, and a podcast host of the Ask Noah Show. So a lot of you probably know him, but let's bring Noah on and let him introduce himself.
Hey there, guys.
Hey, welcome to Rail Presents, my friend. Why don't you, for those of you that don't know, or wow, I've done this before. For people that don't know you, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. So my name's Noah Chelliah, and in 2009, I started a company called Altispeed Technologies, in which we were trying to take open source solutions and make them available to everybody, to businesses, to individual users, so on and so forth. And as part of that journey, we have now grown past 10 years to where people come to us to get open source solutions implemented, or they come to us to solve problems, and we choose to do that with open source. In 2017, I started the Ask Noah Show, and the idea there was to take that body of knowledge that I'd built and share that in a community-based way. So whether it's the next entrepreneur that wants to start a business with open source, wants to make money, wants to become employed using open source, or just wants to spread the love of Linux and open source software to other people, that's the platform in which I can do that.
Sounds very compatible with the sort of things we do at Red Hat.
A little bit.
So we take questions live on air, usually through the YouTube chat or after the fact through YouTube comments. But the Ask Noah Show takes this to a completely different level. You want to tell us about your call-in show for open source?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things when we were looking at how we were going to bring this out to the community and make it available, I was looking at what is out there and where is there a need that's not being served. So what's out there is plenty of really high quality, good, solid Linux content. Everybody, I think if you're in this space, you know a lot of the names that are out there, and I think those people are doing a really great job. What was missing, though, is the on-ramp, right? The place for people to get started and the place for where you start to hit your limits and you're like, hey, I don't know where to go from here. And the thing that really drew me to it, Eric, was that when I got started in Linux, my story comes from a place of I was in high school. I was being demonstrated this very cool and powerful technology that was there. And when I was in school and I wanted to set up a domain controller, I wanted to use, the Microsoft Office suite or some of the Adobe products. Or back then it was, I think, Dreamweaver and those sorts of things. It was great when I was at the high school and had access to those things. But then I go home and I'm like, well, this is great. I've learned this new skill. I want to leverage it. And so I go to install that software on my own computer. And here I'm hit with licensing agreements and thousands of dollars worth of software subscriptions. And I'm going, I make $5.15 an hour. I can't afford that. And so it was just fundamentally, and so really what happened was I built this whole skill set that was effectively useless to me as an individual. And it was a very defeating, very ugly feeling. And so as I started to look around to say, okay, well, I know that I want to accomplish these things. If I can't do it with what I was told and was trained with the tools I was given, is there something else that can do that? And that's where I started to get into open source. And I started to learn that, okay, there are actually comparable tools that are out there that can allow me to do those same things. But I, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, can get access to those things and I can start playing with them. And so fast forward a little bit to 2009, I just took those lessons and said, I want to make that available to other people. And so I did that, obviously as a cost, is they're paying me to do that. When we got to 2017, it was like, okay, now it's time to pay it forward. I want to be there for the next person that is sitting down at his or her computer and says, I want to leverage technology to its full potential. I've got these companies over here that want to sell me a subscription, a software license, a thing, but that isn't really what I'm interested in. I want to own it myself, or I want to leverage it myself. I didn't have the proverbial big brother to back me up in the street fight of, I'm trying to solve this problem. I was just stuck with, well, I can't get on the internet because my Wi-Fi card doesn't work. And I don't know why. And I don't know what I can do about it. I can just unplug it and plug it back in and hope for a different result, which didn't really do much. So in that light, Ask Noah allows me to have people that call in and say, look, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. How do I do that? And we take questions, everything live on the air, from, I need to purchase a computer. What am I looking for when I'm purchasing a computer that's going to give me a good experience for Linux out of the box, all the way up to, hey, I'm starting a small business. I work at a small business. I work at a corporation, and we are trying to leverage open source solutions. How do we sell that to the C-suite? How do we sell that to my manager? How do I sell that to a client? And we take those kinds of questions. And my co-host tonight, who's also a Red Hatter, we try to answer those live on the air for people.
It is shocking how similar that origin, like the broke high school kid who wants to get their hands on software, is to my own story. That's exactly how I got started. I found Red Hat Linux 5.0 late 90s, right? Yeah. And I was in high school, same deal, right? And it's like, boy, in school, I'm learning like this Windows NT thing. What would it take for me to get my hands on that and learn it better so that I could turn this into a job skill? It's how much money? What? Like, is there a student license? No, at the time there kind of wasn't. I mean, I think there might have been, maybe, or at least there was eventually. But at that point, it was just like, wow, okay, what else can I do to just tinker with this? And because that's, like a lot of us, that's how I learn. I learn by getting my hands on a thing,
yes,
and playing with it, making it do things. You know, pick a project and do it. That's what I recommend to a lot of people that are trying to learn Linux specifically. It's like, oh well, what do you need? Learn, like, try to do it, and learn from there. So yeah, I found a lot of similarities there. I thought that was kind of funny.
Can I ask, do we think there's a value in stuff like student licensing? And I ask that question because, is that really serving the end user? Is that really providing the tool available for them? Or is it more of a clever way for a corporation or a company to say, hey, we want you to use this tool. If we don't give you a student license, a limited license, a hoop to jump through, then you won't use that tool. You might go elsewhere. We don't want that, because down the road, we want you to pay for said tool. So we'll start by giving you the free bait, the thing where it's a limited license, but you can do it. Or my favorite, which is a well-known software company, they say, hey, you can't install our operating system. If you do install our operating system, we'll just turn the screen black and we won't really stop you from using it. But if we ever come to your business and do an audit and we find that it's in production, then we'll find you and then we'll get our money. And it seems like that's almost the worst of both worlds, I guess.
So
first of all,
go ahead, Eric.
I see what you did there, Mr. Host. You took a question and turned it back on us. I like that. Well done, sir. Second of all, I want to say it's, if I understood your question correctly, I want to say it's a little bit of both, because I look at Red Hat's Developer for Individuals subscription, which, free PSA, this was not planned. Free PSA, the Developer for Individuals subscription allows you to run up to 16 RHEL boxes at no cost. It's self-support, but it gives you access to things like Red Hat Insights, gives you access to the knowledge base. You can't open a ticket on a D4I subscription, but you can run the stuff at home. So having that, to answer your question, from that perspective, I think there is a certain amount of look out for the little guys, look out for the sysadmin who wants to run the stuff at home to learn to tinker. Because I used to run CentOS Linux in my home lab because there was no way I was going to pay for one, much less multiple subscriptions of RHEL. I was in college or just starting out my career. I don't have $250 per core or whatever it was at the time to pay for a subscription. So I think I think there's this this view of the individual who's trying to learn technology, who wants to run this in their home lab or for their hobby, or there's even certain use cases that are supported for small businesses. But I think at the same time, working for a big vendor, there's a lot to be said for ingraining a user in an ecosystem. Running Rel is great. Rel pays my salary, disclaimer, but running Rel is great. It is, my employer aside, it is one of the best operating systems I've ever come across. But when you tie that in with the rest of the portfolio, you really have something special. Linux is Linux is Linux is Linux. Whether you're using a downstream clone, whether you're using RHEL or upstream with Fedora or CentOS Stream. But when the real shine of RHEL is when you introduce it into our portfolio, things like Insights, things like Satellite, eventually getting into stuff like Ansible. But I kind of see it as a both and instead of an or.
Yeah,
Go
ahead.
So I was just going to say, I think that the open source zealot in me wholeheartedly agrees with you, Noah, that, software that costs a ton of money that then has sort of a bait and switch feel to it is probably bad for the industry. But on the other hand, there's a lot of solutions that kind of require, I shouldn't say require the model, but require the usage of said software, right? Like my big go-to is always that I am hooked hard on the Adobe Creative Suite for a lot of my creative stuff, right?
For sure.
And as much as I hate paying the license, as much as I hate having to boot back into a non-open source operating system to use it, it gets the job done, right? Yes. And I have trouble finding an open source alternative that truly replaces them. Yes, there's tools that do those things. I've never found any of them to fit my workflow the way that I need them to, right? So I think there's always a trade-off, right?
Yeah, I think the big distinguishing difference, though, between the Red Hats of the world and these other proprietary companies that are trying to do this is Red Hat starts with an open source principle in mind and of the user's best interest in mind, and then we grow from there. So, for example, if you take the same experience, Nate, that you and I had as kids, right? So we step into Red Hat and you put the license in front of us and you have the paid subscription and all of that, and we try that. You go home and you want to do that. Let's just say, for the sake of example, for one reason or another, you didn't want to take advantage of the free licensing that Red Hat has. Well, they build their source code from the same sources that you have available, and so you can just go out to the internet and download it, and you're going to be able to do the same. You're going to have access to those same source code. Additionally, if you did have a Red Hat subscription, you can request a copy of the code. So Red Hat isn't trying to keep you out, whereas I see some of these other companies, they want to keep you close enough that they have you on the hook if there's a worm, but past that, they really don't want you inside of their sandbox. And I think that's where I really find it distasteful for some of these other companies, and where I would draw a distinction between those companies and Red Hat.
Gotcha. I like that. Thank you very much for the vote of confidence. Red Hat's been hit by a few poorly handled announcements around source code. So I'm being incredibly diplomatic about that, but it's still open source first. That's still our guiding principle. And even as a technical marketer, it's like I don't care how they come to RHEL. I don't care how you get to Red Hat, as long as you understand our principles.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have much of an agenda, mostly because I know how all three of us think, and that we could very easily close down not one but multiple adult beverage centers if we were to meet in person. So we intentionally kind of kept this one open. So if you're in the audience, by all means, throw out some questions. Heckling is encouraged. I've known Noah a long time, and I can give you some ammunition if you'd like. But we kind of talked about Red Hat's philosophy around licensing and student licensing in particular. You're no stranger to Red Hat, though. You've been involved at Summit in the past. Why don't you tell us when you first came across Red Hat and what that relationship has looked like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was working at a company back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And we deployed Windows 2000 Server. And if you remember Windows 2000 Server, it had this weird little
Try
bug
not to.
where it would assign duplicate DHCP leases to clients, which is a problem if you're the DHCP server, right? And so we would run into once a month or once every 2 months, there would be some problem with this domain controller. And the answer at the company that I worked at the time was just somebody goes into the server room and restarts the server. And then it comes back and then we're good for 30 to 60 days. And okay, got it. We know where the bones are buried. We can handle it. It works, all the things. So the company that I worked for had an interesting policy, and a policy that was so impactful to my life that when I founded Altispeed Technologies in the 10 years since, I have picked up this policy whole hog and said, we are doing this. Even if it costs us money, we are doing this. Even if it's not a good idea and there are insurance problems and all the rest of it, we are doing this. And the policy was, they called it professional development. And the idea was any piece of hardware, from a $250 laptop, used laptop, to a $20,000 rack server, if you wanted it, as long as it wasn't scheduled for deployment within 30 days, you could take it home and you could do whatever you wanted. You had to check it out. You had to tell your supervisor, here's what I'm, planning on doing. But they didn't care. It wasn't, you can take it home, but you can work on work-specific things, or you can work on platforms it was just, hey, there's a server sitting there. You want it. You have an idea for it. Knock yourself out. I learned so much with that level of freedom, and had a lot of fun with expensive toys that I wouldn't have been able to pay for. So that was great. But we've got this new server and we were going to replace the Windows 2000 domain controller. And so I take it home. And of course, I don't have the money to buy a domain controller, so that wasn't happening. But a friend of mine gave me a copy of Red Hat before we were at RHEL, just Red Hat, and installed Red Hat on this server and set it up and got everything kind of dialed in. And we were using a software platform called Lotus Notes Domino. And I noticed that Lotus Notes Domino, the server, was available for Red Hat Linux. So I installed it and got it all set up and played with it for a little bit and ran for a month and 2 months and 3 months. And about the 4 or 5 months in, I went to my supervisor and I'm like, hey, this server migration that we got coming up at the end of the year. And he says, yeah. I said, well, I PD'd the server and I took it home and I installed this thing called Linux on it. And it's been going like over 5 months and I haven't had to reboot it. And he just looks at me, you got to be kidding me. No, I'm dead serious. Oh, we need to do that. And now I'm hitting the brakes. I'm like, whoa. I don't know anything about it. I mean, I literally took the CDs and I put them into the server and I installed the thing and clicked next a bunch of times. And it appears to work, but I don't know anything about this, right? I don't know anything about it. And they were so excited over the prospect of the reliability and, frankly, the ability to spin something up in a test environment without having to buy a license and activate it and all of the hoops that you had to jump through at that time to get something working. We didn't have to do any of that. And so they immediately signed me up for the RHCSA course and said, we are going to send you out. You don't know anything about it. That's fine. We want to learn more about this thing that you're calling Red Hat Linux. And so 3 months later, I was on an airplane and I was at a training center in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I sat through the RHCSA training session, which was awesome, taught by 2 Red Hat instructors. Tested for my RHCSA, got my RHCSA, came back to the company. We not only deployed our server, but all of the clients that were using our software, wiped all the Windows systems off. They all got replaced with Red Hat Linux. I've been an addict ever since. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And so it's one of those things that it started in this fixes a professional problem that I had. But then going forward, I started to realize, well, I also have the ability to use, at that time, Fedora, which kind of tracked ahead of Red Hat, and it allows me to see what's coming down the pipe. And as I started to get some success in my professional career, I started looking to my personal life. I'm like, well, geez, why would my wife use, at the time, Windows XP? And so started wiping machines, family machines, friends' machines, those sorts of things, and putting Fedora on those. And it just kind of snowballed on me. And now I'm a diehard Linux guy. And there's no,
Are you also the IT and support guy for all the people that you have foisted for Fedora Linux onto?
Yes. And, but here's the flip side. The flip side of that is when I was doing, because I was still the tech guy for family when it was Windows, right? But the difference was I would get, I don't know, 8 months, a year, maybe 2 years out of a Windows XP box before it would just bog down and then stop working. And there was there's System Mechanic, and there was all these different programs that you could run to try and clean up the registry and give. But in the end, it's you use Windows too much, it just stops working, and you got to start over. And Fedora, and I still have this box, by the way, set up a Fedora box for a friend of mine, and it was Fedora 2 or Fedora 3, somewhere in there, very early days, right after the split with Red Hat Fedora. And I set it up.
Early 2000s or something, yeah.
Yes. And like 10, 15 years later, I come back and that Fedora box is still in production, kind of horrifying, but still in production, and they were still using it. And I'm like, holy buckets. So there's two things. One is, wow, what a honeypot. But the second reaction was, it still works. I haven't touched the thing. I haven't upgraded the thing. Obviously, it's amazing that it's still running. It's amazing that the disks still work. It's amazing that it's still running, and it still did. And that's been my experience over and over and over again. Is Linux is the solution that you put in when you don't want to mess with it. When you want to set it up one time, you want to leave it alone, and you just want it to work. And I think that shows itself in industry, because automation industry, appliance industry, all of these things, they're leveraging Linux to do it. They ain't running on Windows 7.
So I was incredibly jealous because you've gotten to go to probably as many summits as I have now, if not maybe a few more. But you've gotten to interview the likes of like Stephanie Chiros and some others. So what has it been like to kind of grow with the company?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So the thing that has always appealed to me about Red Hat Summit, well, let me start. Let me draw a parallel for you. The thing that I don't like about other industry similar conferences are you're essentially paying to be marketed to, right? And so some of these conferences you go to and they charge you an atrocious amount of money, and then you sit inside of lecture halls where people tell you marketing speak about why you should buy the thing that you're at the conference to learn about. It's absurd. Red Hat, that is a completely different ballgame, right? The first thing is nobody's trying to sell you anything. They are there to answer questions and to help you understand the value that Red Hat brings. Additionally, you go to some of these other conferences and the person that's standing up there, they are a marketing person, right? They don't know the technical things. And so you start to even ask them, you're like, hey, yeah, I'd potentially be interested, but how does this work? Or how does that work? Or how do you set this up? Or how do you deal with this failure? And the answers are, well, that's a great question, sir. We'll look into that and get back to you. Red Hat.
As a marketing person, I'm deeply offended, sir.
But I can also tell you from this side of that fence, whenever we plan to be at any trade show, whether it's ours or someone else's, there's always someone like me or Eric, or even more deeply technical, at least an SA level in the booth, so that when those technical questions come, there's someone there to answer it, not just someone in a spiffy polo shirt that can hand you their business card.
To your point, though, Eric, you are a technical person, right? Your moniker, as it is Eric the IT guy, because you live and eat and breathe in the industry. Sure, your role is marketing, but you have the technical underpinnings to be able to do that. And I think that is, again, a brand distinguisher for Red Hat. The people that show up to those conferences, the people that are presenting, the people that I've had the opportunity to sit down, they are capable, they are willing, and they're passionate about answering those questions. When I sat down with Matt Hicks, one of the things I asked him was, what geek projects are you working at inside of your home? Outside of Red Hat, outside of what you're paid to do, what do you do? And he did big old smile on his face. Oh man, you know what? I live in this house in Boston, and the doorbell, you can't hear it. And so I developed this thing that's using AI to listen to when the doorbell goes off and it triggers a notification. He's building all that. Nobody asked him to do that. Nobody's paying him to do that. Why is he doing that? He's doing that because he's a passionate technologist at heart. And Red Hat finds those people and says, hey guys, or women, let me give you a paycheck to do the thing that you're doing, because that provides value to our customers. And so a direct answer to your question, I like going to Red Hat Summit, and I like talking to those people because I learn. I learn about Linux. I learn about the community. I learn about what's coming down the pipe, and I learn what Red Hat has to offer.
In case you're missing it, The reason why you should show up to these things live, folks, is that the chat is just hysterical right now. There's a lot of jokes being thrown back and forth.
Yeah. Apparently, I've offended pointy-haired Scott's snazzy polo shirt.
Yeah, manager Scott has appeared in chat, so we're heckling our manager right now, mostly because he doesn't have a microphone. I'll pay for it on Friday when Into the Terminal's live and I'm producing instead of hosting, but it'll be worth it. Oh gosh, this is the problem with coming in without much of an agenda. I knew we could all talk for hours.
It's only been 30 minutes. We still have a good 30 minutes to waste. Don't worry.
Oh, there's plenty of things we could talk about. I'm just trying to keep us away from some of the more dangerous topics. So let me brag on you for a second here, Noah. And Chuck Mattern's in the audience today. Howdy Chuck. He's someone I consider a mentor and a Red Hat friend. But I kind of threw Noah under the bus and said that he's the reason why I do what I do. This is the type of people, and I'll make a point here in a second. But I got to tell a story on Noah first. One of the things that I learned, my background was similar to y'all's with finding Linux. I think Fedora Core 4 was my first attempt, and sure enough, the Wi-Fi card didn't work. So I was trying to find a place at DeVry to plug in my laptop into the wall and get just enough of an internet connection to download the correct drivers so that it would actually work. So that too was my early experiences. And I made this progression from desktop support to server administrator, and I can remember around 2009, 2010, being at a bookstore. That's where these paper-bound books actually sat on shelves, and you would go and purchase these things. I know they don't exist anymore, but I went to an actual bookstore, and in my hand I had an RHCSA study guide. I probably looked at that one too. And then in the other, I had a study guide for Microsoft Server Administration. I had them both.
A friend of
in my
mine was
hand.
emptying out his house and found this and left it on my porch. That's the only reason I have it handy. It's even got a CD in the back, which presumably has some distribution of Linux on it.
That's awesome. And I remember sitting there, both books in my hand, and making the choice that this Red Hat thing is a practical exam, whereas this Microsoft thing is multiple choice. So ultimately, I went with Linux as a career choice because I felt like I could get the learning that I needed. I felt like I could prove to myself and to my employer that I passed the RHCSA exam. I apparently know something about what I'm doing, not much, but something. And I went on like that for 5 or 6 years, but there was a piece missing to my career, and that was the community. Open source just isn't a license type. It isn't legalese. It stands for community. It stands for people. And so way back when, there was a show called the Linux Action Show. Noah was one of the hosts, and I caught as many episodes as I could. I learned a lot, and back in the day, I think it was Telegram or IRC or both, and engaging with people that I know now, people that I work with, who I didn't know worked in the industry. Excuse me. And so it was really amazing to I learned about technology and community and the industry so much more through a podcasting community than I did through years of studying books and working as a systems administrator. And so I remember reaching out to Noah, and he and I got talking because we were both interested in open source, but also like lighting design, and we had similar family dynamics. Just randomly engaged with this random guy that I'd never met, and so I won't ever forget this, Noah. You probably have forgotten the conversation because you have it all the time, but I won't forget after one of those like multiple hour Telegram conversations back and forth. You're like, you really should consider doing some kind of podcast hosting or being a guest on a regular basis or something, because you really understand people. It's like, I'm a sysadmin. I'm a technologist. I don't do people. And so to skip forward, I mean, here we are, gosh, 8 years later. I've made the switch from IT operations to sales to now marketing. I moved from hiding in the back to going to conferences and giving talks. And I have never been more thrilled with my career than I am right now. The marketing is like a teaching job, but you get to do fun things, like live streams. And Noah and I will sit up late into the hours, like debating the newest microphone. It's like, what should I get? This absolutely doesn't matter because anything above like this level of microphone is fine, but it's not good enough. It's got to be perfect. And so I'm really, really humbled and honored to have a friend like you. Know I really appreciate the impact that you've had on my life, the impact that you've had on my career, and ultimately my family. So when I say that my career choices are Noah's fault, there you go.
It's the ability to pay it forward, right? The ability to help the next guy either get to where they want to be in their IT career, or as you're talking about the marketing aspect, the fantastic thing about 2024 is anybody can have a platform. Now, the downside to 2024 is anybody can have a platform, but it means that the barrier to entry is so much lower, and the barrier to connect with other people is so much lower. So that's something I think to celebrate. I also think the open exchange of ideas and the open exchange of knowledge and support is prevalent in a way today that it hasn't been in the past, and that gives people that ordinarily wouldn't have access to technology access to technology.
It's funny,
sure.
like 2017 or so, it's when I first started getting into creating content in a way that was audio or visual, right? I started the Iron SysAdmin podcast. I think it was mid to late 2017. And the world then was not easy to get started in. Like, the platforms were there, but the technology, the equipment, the level of knowledge you needed from like an audio editing, recording, whatever perspective, and the number of hoops you had to jump through to get this stuff done, it just wasn't as straightforward as it is today. To the point where I had, after about a year or so, I made a talk, like, so you want to start a podcast is what I called it. And I delivered it at a couple of conferences because people were having legitimate trouble. And within like 3 or 4 years, I had to stop giving the talk because none of it was relevant anymore. The whole space had changed so much. You know, you've got all these online services like the thing we use for streaming right here that we're in right now. This wasn't possible then. You had to use like OBS and some weird collection of like meeting software or Zoom or whatever you wanted to do to try to make this stuff happen. And it was so complicated. Now it's so much easier.
Even OBS, I mean, 2017, 2018 ish. I mean, they were just coming onto the scene. And prior to that, it was difficult, sans impossible to do professional video broadcasting on Linux. Today, that's a given. And now there's companies building appliance-based boxes to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Crazy how different the space is now.
So if you had to do it all over, Nate and Noah, I'll ask you both this, because we've all built communities around podcasts and around communities. We've built communities of communities, something along those lines. So in 2024, if you had to do it all over again, are there certain places that you would go to find that community, or are there certain things you would consider to be able to build a community from scratch if you had to?
So I would answer that a couple different ways. So the first thing is, technologies like Matrix allow us to meet people where they're at. And I think that's something that's oftentimes lost on people. You'll get people that will say, how do I get people to, it doesn't really matter what the end of that sentence is. We're approaching the problem incorrectly, in my view. It shouldn't be, how do we get people to, it should be, how do we get to the people? And so as a communications platform, Matrix allows me to reach out to people on Discord and on Telegram and on Signal and on LinkedIn and on Facebook Messenger, even though those platforms aren't things that I want to have a presence on, even though those things aren't things I want to continue to try to maintain. It gives me the ability to reach those people, to communicate with those people, to love on those people, whether or not we share the same technical resources, let's call it. The second thing that I think I would do differently, or where the landscape has changed and we would approach the problem differently, is the podcasting 2.0 space, right? So previously it was kind of the Wild West. You record audio or you record video and you throw it up into the ether somewhere and hopefully people find it. The problem is the ether is split between RSS feeds and YouTube and PeerTube, and it just depends on the platform that you're using. It depends on the content that you're doing. Depends on the format that you're trying to go for. All of those things mean a wide variety of podcasting. And the nice thing about the podcasting 2.0 movement is that it's slowly shifting everything into a standardized way. So, okay, the RSS thing was great. The problem is there was no monetary thing attached to it. And so you were spinning up things like Patreon, or you're relying on things like private donations, which meant that you had to custom develop a form so that people could go and enter in a credit card number to support your podcast and those sorts of things. All that changes and is out the window with podcasting 2.0. It has the monetary stuff built in so that when somebody likes something they're hearing, they tap on the button and it sends peanuts your way, right? And that tells you, it does two things. One is it makes you as a content provider beholden to the person who is listening. The second thing is it makes it available for anybody, regardless of the content, regardless of the nature of the content. They also can monetize what they're doing, and they'll be rewarded for with value when they bring valuable content in. So I think that paradigm has allowed us to shift a little bit and would cause me to approach the problem of how do you get a message out there? How do you broadcast in a different way? It would change for me. What do you think, Nate?
Honestly, the drawing people to the show was the piece I always had the most trouble with. It's funny the position that I work in now, because the joke on Iron SysAdmin was always that I was the worst marketer ever. Even though I ran the show, right? One of my co-hosts was the guy who would always be like, "Hey, we should post that." Oh yeah, that's probably a good idea, right? So to be honest, it's social media has really changed the game as to getting outreach, getting people to notice your show and whatnot. So and I also think that the world in general is moving away from audio only content, and they want video content. And it's really difficult to judge what format they want to consume that in. So many people will tell you, oh, people don't want long content, or they want long content, or they want content they can watch on their phone, or they want content that they can watch, or they don't have to watch at all, that they only hear, right? It's really difficult to really put a pin on exactly what kind of content you should be creating. So I guess all that to say, I'm really not sure. I don't know what I would change. I would probably try it the same way, make a place for people to gather and then try to draw people to it in some way, right?
If I was to give somebody one piece of advice, if they were looking at, and this would be true, you could apply this to broadcasting about open source, you could apply it to providing IT services, you could apply it towards a company. It doesn't matter, that the advice would be the same. And that is, go find a need that somebody else has and serve it. Go find and identify what somebody else needs and go fill that need. And so in my case, it was people on the internet, geeks have questions about Linux. And at the moment, there's not a good consistent place that you can go to get those questions answered. They exist in various forms, but they all have little gotchas. So the Arch user forms, they're great, but it's typically based on Arch or caters towards that audience. And every distro has their own form, or every place has their own thing. Where is the cohesive one place? Hey, I'm looking to get into the industry. Hey, I'm looking to implement this in my life. Hey, I want to leverage technology to its full potential, and I don't want to be a slave to some corporate company. I want to own it. How do I do that? Who's answering that question? And we saw the need, and we were able to answer it. That part of it would be consistent today, right? If I was to go start another podcast today, I'd be asking that question. Where is there a need, and how can we fill it? The thing that I think is lost on some people, and the thing that I think we have to be prepared for, is oftentimes if a need isn't being filled, why is that? Is it too difficult? Is it too expensive? Why is that need not being filled? And oftentimes what you'll find is, in order to effectively fill that need, you might have to extend yourself further than you thought you wanted to. You might have to do some things you weren't comfortable doing, because sometimes to serve another person, it requires a bit of sacrifice from yourself.
I love that.
However, sometimes the need that's not being filled is because the need is very, very difficult, or
Absolutely.
might look like a need, but nobody actually wants it, right? I've been down that road a few times where it's like, hey, no one's doing that thing. I'm going to do that thing. And then when you start doing it, you're like, no one wanted that thing. That's why nobody made that thing.
Yep. So in that case, right, we didn't identify a need. We identified something that we wanted to do, and then we learned that the need really wasn't there.
Sorry, I muted myself. You're right.
So it's funny you talk about launching a podcast from scratch, because I'm in the process of doing that. I've got the IT Guy show, and I've got about 6-7 episodes out there right now, and I'm gonna use this chance to pick your brain, Noah. Something that I think sysadmins are my people. Always have been, always will be.
Mhm.
That's the niche I found when I got into technology. That's to me, it was the room filled with all the wires, cords, and blinking lights. It was the networking lab at DeVry, where I fell in love with infrastructure. And I think one of the things that right now sysadmins are dealing with is, over the past 10 years, we've seen the demands of IT infrastructure change. We've seen the rise of cloud. We've seen this jump away from cloudify everything back to, well, maybe we should have a hybrid environment, because we just realized that the cloud is expensive and isn't a silver bullet. But we're also seeing things like the rise of automation, infrastructure as code. We're seeing things like Kubernetes, where it's still infrastructure. You're still dealing with an operating system that talks to hardware. Sure, it's abstracted and a little bit different than the standalone server, but it's still infrastructure. And now we've got AI, and just like every other advancement that I've seen in the industry, there's this rush of people that are going to say, "Oh my gosh, XYZ technology is going to run me out of a job. All I want to do is be a sysadmin or a network engineer, and I'm not going to do that anymore." Now, my response is always, "No, that's not true. You may have to evolve." But one of the things that I'm diving into for myself, and one of the things that I'm trying to create content around, is nowadays we have different names for it, but still infrastructure people and systems administrators. Now we hear them called DevOps engineers, platform engineers. Then I'd like to fashion myself as an automation engineer fluent in YAML. Um, but is that a need that you're seeing in your space? This identity crisis for infrastructure administrators?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. So you're right.
Keeps me up at night, literally.
We did see a push of people going to the cloud. I think part of it was an expense thing. I think the other part, though, was we identified that not every industry functions best in cloud, right? And so if you're a manufacturing firm and you have a software application that's doing safety profile monitoring, and so it's watching to see if a person's hand, I'm making this up, crosses a laser and then it wants to shut a saw blade off for a machine, something along those lines, right? Can you do those things in the cloud? Sure. Should you do those things in the cloud? Momentary internet and John lost his finger? Probably not, right? And that's where you started to see this idea of hybrid cloud, and where you started to see these companies looking over and saying, okay, well, Red Hat makes this product, Red Hat makes this service. If you want to run it, we started running it on-prem. If you want to run it in the cloud, we can do that too. If it needs to be on-prem or in the cloud, we can make that scalable, and you're able to slide it around wherever you like. And then you add containers to the mix. Now, all of a sudden, that becomes more possible than ever to deliver the product wherever the people want the product. You talk about automation, and you talked a little bit about, how did you phrase it? You said you wanted to be an automation.
I want to become an automation engineer fluent in my programming language of choice will be YAML.
Okay, there you go. So and you kind of say that sarcastically, but the truth is, right, the vast majority of the RHCSA today is doing Ansible, because you should know, and I tell everybody that applies for a job, I tell them this, you should know how to do all of this by hand. You should know how to set every one of these systems up by hand, because that means you understand it down to its most basic level, and that will come back to help you in the form of troubleshooting. But once you understand it, you should never do it that way because it isn't reproducible. It's not scalable. It's difficult. And so take advantage of the orchestration technologies that are there. Do those things. And so, yes, we're absolutely seeing that shift. I think the thing that surprised me, Eric, if you would have asked me 6, 7 years ago, hey, Noah, do you think that you could compete in the cloud space? I would have told you there's no way, right? There's no way that I can compete with big name companies that offer big name mail, everything office in a bundle suites for a flat fee per month. There's just no way that little Noah in Grand Forks, North Dakota, running Altispeed Technologies is going to be able to do that. And 5 years later, I would tell you I have a very different perspective because we had a client that was using one of the big name mail suites. And they had this problem where they couldn't send any email to anybody with an email ending at yahoo.com. And so they came to us and said, hey, IT guys, we can't send email. Can you figure it out? So we opened a support ticket with this company and they got back to us and said, oh, yes, we're going to look into it. We're sure there's a problem and we will find it and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So I'm thinking 3 hours, 5 hours, maybe a day. I'm not sure. And so 3 months later, the problem got fixed. And the organization really wasn't very happy because the reality is that when your business comes to a screeching halt saying the ticket is in your queue and we are looking into the problem and allocating resources as best we can and we'll address it as soon as possible, doesn't really move the needle for you. At the end of the day, you're still sitting there looking and saying, well, but how am I supposed to run my business? And so that was an opportunity for us to look over and say, okay, are there maybe some open source solutions that we can provide that leverage this idea of running it in the cloud, running it on-prem, sliding it back and forth wherever it needs to be? And it turns out software packages like cFile, like Nextcloud, those give businesses the ability to do the kind of collaborative work they want to do without being beholden to some huge company. And so in a way, we have started to compete in a space I never thought we could. But it's effective because in part, Linux and the orchestration technology means that I can take the playbook and I point it towards a VPS that's rented by the client and I go and it does the thing. And then all of a sudden they go, well, no, we wanted it on our premise. Okay, no problem. So I point the playbook towards their server and go and it does the thing. And we migrate the data over and now it's over there. Oh, our building burned down. No problem. We take the backup and we'll point it back at the cloud, or we roll out, and we've absolutely done this, take a cold shelf server from our place, put it into a rack, roll it into wherever it is that they need. In one case, there was a law office. They wanted to just have a pop-up office in a rented space and they gave us no notice. They're just like, hey, we need to operate out here today. No problem. We roll some equipment in, point the playbooks, go. And all of a sudden, their infrastructure spins up there. So that ability and that flexibility, I don't think we as open source technologists do a good enough job advocating for it. I think we largely park that under this idea that, hey, we're the nerds, we'll deal with it. You just tell me what you want and I'll make it happen. And I've got some really cool stuff to do that. And I think that's where the C-suite kind of parks it, is like, oh, the nerds do nerd things in the nerd room and they're happy with the nerd tools that they have and it works well for them. I think that's really the level that they understand it. But I think that things like Ansible make technology more approachable to people from the standpoint that my kid who's in middle school is orchestrating mine test servers and other game servers with his friend, and he's doing it all with Ansible. And I look at that and I go, man, what a contrast from when I was a kid, the technology that I was demonstrated and shown and taught, and my inability to implement those same things. What a contrast that my kid can go download the same software that I'm using to make my living, and he can go play with it with his friends to do those same things inside of his bedroom. That's a very cool and democratizing way to look and view in technology. And I think we live in a time where that's just super cool.
So I have two quick comments. One, I love how your examples have been so severe. First, we have poor John who lost a finger because of a cloud outage. And second, we have a business's building burning down. And the other was, you mentioned automation and referenced the RHCSA. I wanted to clarify one thing. The SA is still very much a hands-on, like Linux command line class and exam. And the RHCE now has a bunch of automation added to it. So to your point, right, you should know how to do it and how to automate it, right? So that's kind of like the trade-off there.
Yeah, great.
In case
great
anybody
point of
was listening
clarification.
and is questioning that, right?
Sure.
Sorry, Eric, I talked over you.
No, you're fine. I was just affirming what you were saying, because I passed my RHCSA a couple of years ago without much trouble, and then I pretty well bombed the RHCSE or the RHCE.
RHCE was not an easy test. I mean, they're never an easy test. They weren't an easy test before it was automation based. It was hard then, but fun. I mean, I've said this many times. You can probably go back a decade and hear me say the same words in many different forms. I thought that the RHC SA and RHCE were the most fun exams I've ever taken in my life, and that holds true.
Of course, tip for the for some of the dummies like me that are out there that attempt the RHCE. By the way, you get a copy, a local copy of the Ansible docs as part of the RHCE, so you can open a tab and search the documentation.
Well, that's the key is
Didn't realize that till I
right.
had
So
20 minutes left in the exam.
Our exams aren't designed to make you memorize stuff. They're designed to teach you how to find the stuff you need, right?
Mhm.
So like memorizing Jinja templates isn't what the exam is about. It's about knowing that Jinja templates exist and how to find the docs. So always go into one of our exams with that in mind. You have
Yes.
the docs that you need, but you don't have internet access, right? So, and the first rule, I guess, of Red Hat exams is you don't talk about Red Hat exams. So sorry.
I think it's just the content, right? This is an absolutely true story. My so the RHCSA, as I recall, was there were 2 parts. Or maybe it was 2 classes and there was 1 test. I don't recall. But there was a guy in our class who I don't know exactly how he did it, but he somehow was able to get into the instructor's box and copy some of the packages out and install it. And I don't know what the end result was from Red Hat, but I do know that when the instructor called and said, "Hey, I need some guidance here," the questions they asked, they were like, "Well, did he connect to the internet? No. Okay. Did he and did he use any external resource, bring anything into the classroom? No, it was the instructor box that was up at the front of the classroom." Okay. And so again, I don't know what the end result was, but I do know that I remember thinking at that moment, Red Hat has such a practical view of certification. And because of not just that experience, but my own experience going through some of the certification, when somebody sits in my office and says, "I have XYZ certification," if that certification came from Red Hat, I know that person has practical skill sets, as opposed to some of the other industry certifications where, as you alluded to, Nate, you can either memorize the questions, or there's one particular network certification that largely what it tells me is that you can write on a transparency and you can erase on a transparency with nothing more than saliva, 1 Kleenex, and your thumb. And you're excellent at that. But as far as your networking skills, I don't know. I mean, we'll have to find out.
I thought my anecdote about the bookstore was dating me a little bit, but you go all the way back to transparencies. I mean, it's like early '90s education, dude. You're
Overhead
dating
projectors
all.
with
Please
transparencies.
stop.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It is there's a network certification. They give you a transparency to write on with like a washable marker, and you can use it almost like a scratch thing. But they give you a single uno Kleenex to wipe, which doesn't have any sort of liquid, so it doesn't really dissolve the washable. It's just a mess. It's a disaster.
So sadly, we are coming up towards the top of the hour. Noah, any closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with the audience?
My closing thoughts would be, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, or you're looking at either the inspiration and or the incredible opportunities afforded to you by open source technologies and by companies like Red Hat, who want to make that technology available to everybody, not just people who pay for it, not just people who are their customers. They genuinely want to invest in the community. I would encourage people to make value-based decisions about their technology. So often when I'm in circles, I hear this: "Well, no, I wouldn't make a decision just based off of the license on the code. That's a silly way to..." It's more than that. It's way more than that. It's not just code. It's not just a computer. That's the memories of your kids. That's the photos, of life events that happen with your family. That's the last photos you have of relatives that have passed on. There's a whole bunch of our lives that are tied up in these personal computers. And I think sometimes that gets lost on us. And I think because we get bit from it, we tend to try to, oh, we stubbed our toes, so let me just push that off, and I'll push it off to the cloud, or I'll pay Google, or I'll pay Apple to store that stuff because I don't feel like I can trust myself with it. And I would just encourage you that now more than ever, you have the technology exists and the community exists to help come around you and help you understand how you can leverage it for yourself to its full potential. So whether that means you want to go out and start a business, or you want to go work for a business and leverage open source technology, or you just want to be a geek in your basement and have fun, no matter where you are on that spectrum, open source has something to offer you. And the people that are in the community that work so hard to put these products on the planet, they want you to leverage it and they want you to use it. And now's the time where all you have to do is say, yeah, I have an opportunity, a willingness to learn, and I got some spare time.
And seriously, the geek in the basement statement, just have fun being a geek in the basement, that is precisely how I got interested in IT, precisely how I built my career. And I feel like I'm doing pretty well. So, maybe that same formula doesn't work in the same way that it did when I was a kid in the mid 90s, but I think the principle still exists. Learn the stuff when it's fun, and you'll always enjoy doing it when it's a job.
Knowledge is the
Yeah,
one
for
thing
sure.
nobody can take away from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my first home lab project, the first time I built a PC specifically to be a server, my first project was Minecraft. When I started to learn containers, the first project I did was Minecraft. Now I'm
Detecting a trend.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something fun, and I mean, now it's just nostalgia purposes, really. But I mean, to this day, right now, running in a Podman container powered by Quadlet, I have a Minecraft server. I've maybe played 15 minutes of it with my son, but I have a Minecraft server, and it's running in my home lab. And and
For me, it's Valheim servers. So,
well, I've got one of those too, which you and I need to log back into and play. But
some terrible sysadmin lost the world files, though. I'm gonna
I
file a
rebuilt
ticket.
it best I could. I'm sorry.
If you cared about it, it would have been in 3 places.
Exactly.
I cared about it a little bit because it was in 2 places, and then I rebuilt one of them, and then the other one just blew up. So, yeah, three places would have been more better. All right, so Nate, any closing thoughts?
This has been a fun conversation. I really appreciate you as a guest there, Noah.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks for letting me join you.
Yeah, I knew this would be a fun time, and I'm Nate. No, I'm glad you guys could join me today. This was a lot of fun. I knew it would be, since someone said that they'd hang out with us at Summit and never appeared. Noah.
I know. Next time, I guess.
Who's that?
So if you enjoyed our conversation today, definitely check out Noah. He's live on Tuesday nights. You can find him at the AskNoahShow.com. He go on and tell him that you heard about him here on Rail Presents, and then try and stump him on air. I haven't yet seen anyone successfully stump him. I've seen some commitments to revisit a topic, but that's about as close as I've seen.
Man, I thought about doing live like stump the host stuff on Iron Sysadmin, and we never had the courage to do it. So props, man.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that the truth of the matter is oftentimes there are no new problems under the sun, right? And so to a degree, you can kind of, once you get a general idea of troubleshooting or identifying the root cause, doesn't really matter what the specifics of the problems are. We can oftentimes walk down anybody's track and arrive at the solution. Now, sometimes they don't always like the answers, right? But we can get there. So yeah, AskNoahShow.com Tuesdays. I would shameless self-promotion. I believe this to be the only terrestrial radio show in the country that focuses on Linux and open source technology. So we're live at 88.3 in our local area, but I'm not aware of any other radio station that focuses on Linux and open source technology. So I think we get to hold that badge high.
That's old school, man. My kids don't even understand what a radio station is because it's just not technology that they care about.
Yep. That's available via podcast too,
Yeah.
podcast.asknoahshow.com. But the radio aspect is nice because I think it allows an audience that ordinarily wouldn't be there. If you
Yeah.
are subscribed to a podcast, you have to know about it. The nice thing about the terrestrial part is I've literally had people going, listen, I don't really know 80% of what you're talking about, but I was driving on my way to work, or I was going on my way to the store, I was on my way to grab groceries, I was grabbing the kids from school, and I heard this really fascinating discussion about how you can store your photos with image, and you can self-host image, and it does what Google Photos does, but you can host it yourself. And that's really appealing to me. Can you help me set that up, or can you give me some advice on how to get there? And so we are reaching people with open source software that ordinarily wouldn't be reached.
That is, and at the risk of running us too far over, that is part of the problem with the way we consume media today, right? Used to be you'd plop yourself down in front of your favorite TV channel or favorite radio station, and whatever was on,
Yes.
and you'd get exposed to new things. Now we seek out the content we're already interested in, and you don't learn things that are outside your bubble. And that's kind of a big problem with what we see today and the way things are so polarized. But I digress. I'll let Eric close.
Well, I mean, it's like a few years ago, we took my wife and kids down to our family cabin, and we were just killing some time between afternoon activities and dinner. So I just absentmindedly turned on the TV, and we found Jim Carrey's The Grinch, and it's like, this is perfect. We'll kill 20 minutes watching The Grinch, and we sat down and started watching it. Kids couldn't figure out where the skip ads button was because this was regular cable TV. I completely blew their minds. Had to explain to them this isn't like YouTube where you get to hit skip. This isn't like Plex where there's no commercials or anything. You have to sit here and you have to watch these, or you can change the channel. Because
how do we pause it?
Yeah, exactly.
How do we start it over? I want to watch it again. I
Yeah,
don't like this.
it's like
You don't.
go to
You never leave for fear of missing that one scene in your favorite show,
Right.
because you went to get some popcorn.
Completely blew their minds. Oh goodness. Now I'm digressing. So definitely catch Noah on the Ask Noah show Tuesday nights. You can check him out on a local radio station or as a podcast. I think there's even a mumble room you can join and hang out after the fact. It's been a while. Tuesdays are usually pretty crazy, but I'll have to come and hang out after. Now that I've drugged you on my show, I'll have to go heckle you on yours. Nate, I was going to say Into the Terminal, but Friday Red Hat offices are closed, so Nate and Scott will not be hanging out. They said that taking a day off was more important than hanging out with all of you live on the air. So
Lies.
Jerks, but
Lies.
So there'll be no Into the Terminal this week, but join us. Join Scott and Nate. I'll be on PTO next Friday, so join Scott and Nate for a topic yet to be determined on Into the Terminal. Is our hands-on get into the tech show. If you're a frequent visitor or if you're new to Rail Presents, I should say, we are live every other Wednesday. So every 2 weeks we've got a new topic. This was a very un-Rail Presents. A lot of conversation. We threatened to throw Noah a demo and not tell him anything about it. That might have been fun. We should have done that, but we decided to be nice and we just
give us a demo on Technology XYZ now. Go dance.
I welcome demos. Like I told you guys in the pre-show when we were kind of chatting. If you can't do it in front of people when you're just demoing it, it will be more difficult to do it when somebody's business relies on it. So live demos all the way.
For sure. So if you have a chance in your local community to do a live demo, you'll learn that piece of tech better than ever in a classroom or somewhere safe in a lab or something. When you know that you have to type and talk in front of, I mean, there's 20 some odd people watching this live, and there'll be several hundred watching it after the fact. So yeah, just ask those Into the Terminal guys how live demos go. But anyway, hey, we're only 4 minutes over. Tell that to the Into the Terminal guys too.
What do you mean?
If you haven't, go ahead
and guideline.
Go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Hit that like button if you enjoyed our conversation today. Like I said, very Unreal Presents of us, but really enjoyed sitting back and having a chat with a good friend. If you'd like more content like this, let us know. We'll find some medium for Noah and Nate and I to hang out and talk about old times and IT. Definitely leave any questions or comments you have in the comments below, and share this with a friend. one of the things that I really love about being one of the managers of the Rail YouTube channel and one of the hosts of our shows is that I get to share the knowledge and experiences that I've had and pick the brains of others. So this is kind of my chance to, from a Red Hat chair, don't tell anybody, but Red Hat pays me to do this show. But I really enjoyed the topics, really enjoyed the guests and the banter. So this is our chance to kind of give some knowledge back. So definitely check out Rail Presents. We just had an episode on Podman Desktop for AI. So if you're interested in the AI space, definitely check out that topic. And I've managed to vamp for about 2 minutes on what's coming up. So subscribe to the channel, and you don't even need to hear this part. So with that said, thank you to my guest, Noah Chelliah, Colonel Linux himself. Thank you for joining us today. And on behalf of my co-host, Nate Lager, and the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.